Welcome back, everybody. President Trump is close to naming his pick to replace retiring Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. NBC News is reporting that the president is still considering 4 nominees, but is focusing primarily on Brett Kavanaugh and Thomas Hardiman. An announcement is expected tonight, and joining us right now to talk more about it is John Malcolm. He is vice president at the Heritage Foundation, senior legal fellow, and the director of the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. In 2016, John created a short list of successors for the late Justice Antonin Scalia, a list that President Trump cited as influential in his own roster of potential nominees. And John, thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be with you.
So how many of the names that are being considered right now were on the short list that you came up with back in 2016?
Brett Kavanaugh was on that list, and he'd do an outstanding job, as with the other 3 people who are still being considered.
What's the difference between the candidates that we've been talking about most often? Are there differences between them? Is it something that you think would be easier for any of them to get appointed politically or to make it through the Senate confirmation process? Or are there others that you think have big differences of opinion?
Well, I think that any of the 4 would be confirmed. Thomas Hardiman is the one who, if you will, is flying under the radar screen the furthest. There are big differences between them. Thomas Hardiman, for instance, has been a judge since 2003. He was a district court judge for 3 years before being elevated to the 3rd Circuit. Amy Barrett, on the other hand, has only been a judge for a few months, but she had a very distinguished academic career before that, and has written on a lot of issues that conservatives care a lot about.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. We were joking earlier about a bit where a lot of kids on college campuses were asked what they thought of the president's nominee, and they all said they hated it before they found out that he hadn't made that nomination yet. But it is telling in that very likely any of his picks will please conservatives, and very likely any of his picks would disappoint liberals. Is that fair to say?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, conservatives, everybody has their favorite. You sort of hear whisper campaigns going on with criticisms of the potential nominees that the person doesn't like and praise for the one that they do like. I do think that once there is a nominee, the conservatives will largely rally around that nominee because, as I say, again, all 4 of them are excellent. And yeah, the Democrats are stealing for a fight, and I think this is going to make the Gorsuch confirmation hearing look like a minor dust-up.
Oh, God. Do you worry still about the Souter phenomenon? And you'd almost have to be a Manchurian candidate, wouldn't you? Your whole career would have to be about fooling people into thinking you're a conservative. And how did that happen with Souter? Do you remember? Were you involved with that at all? And did he change? Was the vetting was... What happened there? I don't even understand how something like that could happen, but I guess...
Yeah, I wasn't involved in it, but here's how it could happen, and here's how it did happen. So David Souter was a fairly obscure justice on the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And just, I don't know, 4 or 5 months before he was elevated to the Supreme Court, he was confirmed to the 1st Circuit Court of Appeals. Almost all the rulings that he had made dealt with obscure issues of New Hampshire law. The president was looking for somebody who could get through those times like today are contentious times. And he had whispering in his ear 2 very influential people, John Sununu, his chief of staff, and Warren Rudman, who was a senator from Connecticut, said, don't worry, David Souter is our kind of guy. And of course, he, from a conservative's perspective, turned out to be not our kind of guy.
What are the big issues facing the court? I mean, we hear a lot about Roe versus Wade, but from a business perspective, are there other issues that our audience might be on the lookout for?
Well, it seems all anybody is hearing about is Roe versus Wade. You would think that abortion would be the only issue that would come up to the high court. Of course, they consider a whole variety of issues, many of interest to the business community, dealing with patents and arbitration, and any court that is going to be setting rules, particularly for businesses that rely on commercial certainty, has to care about who the nominee is going to be. People make very important life decisions and business decisions based on the law, and anything that unsettles the law in that kind of way is probably not good for business.
So who do we know the least about in terms of actual words on paper of the 4?
Well, Amy Barrett, in terms of judicial opinions, because she's only issued 8 or 9 of them, I believe. Thomas Hardiman has written a lot of opinions, but only in a few areas that conservatives care a lot about. Religious liberty and the Second Amendment are the 2 that immediately come to mind. Kethledge and Kavanaugh have fairly extensive records, as does Hardiman, They've been on the court for a decade or more and have written quite a number of opinions that people can examine.
Who was the also ran in the Gorsuch? Yeah, that was Hardiman. So you're saying he's under the radar. Why is he still under the radar if he was the closest to getting it with Gorsuch?
Well, look, Tom Hardiman is a great guy and a fabulous judge. He sits on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and he just hasn't had the opportunity to rule on as many issues that conservatives care about. He hasn't dealt with any cases involving abortion. He hasn't dealt with that many significant constitutional cases or separation of powers cases. All of the opinions that he's written are very, very solid, but some conservatives will look and say, well, I'd like a little bit more comfort than the fact that he's a very good judge who's written on a number of issues that I don't particularly care about.
Can understand the preferences among these four finalists, but do you think it makes a big difference in terms of the speed of confirmability? I mean, is that kind of the track that the president's going to be most focused on?
Well, I don't know that he's going to be most focused on that. I think he's going to be most focused on picking the person who he thinks will do the best job and who has the best personal rapport with him. A lot of this, at the end of the day, comes down to gut feel. There's no question that Brett Kavanaugh, for instance, has an extensive record. He's written over 300 opinions. He was a member of Ken Starr's team in the Office of Independent Counsel. He served in the Bush White House for 5 years. There'd be a lot there to examine, but they could still get it done before the Supreme Court resumes its business on October 1st.
Do you have okay, it's not 25%, 25%, 25%, 25. In your view, it's not. Do you have a favorite if this was the Kentucky Derby? What do you think?
Yeah,
Kavanaugh?
look, I'm a big Brett Kavanaugh fan.
He's a bushy, though. Does that matter?
Well, it may matter to the president. I would probably give the nod to Brett Kavanaugh, but really any of the four would do an outstanding job. Really?
Any of the four? All right, you're the opposite of all those guys on college campus. They didn't like any of them. They're all Satan.
I'm a few years removed from college.
God help us. All right, thank you. I'll thank him. Thank you. It was great to have you on, the guy that wrote the list.
The original list.